At my son's funeral, while my hand was still covered in the wet dirt from his grave, my daughter-in-law leaned in close. I expected a hug, or perhaps a shared moment of grief for the man we both supposedly loved. Instead, she whispered 4 words that would seal her fate. "Stop crying, old man." She paused, checking her waterproof mascara in the reflection of her sunglasses, before continuing. "You have 20 days to get out of my house. I need to sell it for cash, and a depressed 72-year-old roommate is bad for property value." I just smiled, wiped the dirt from my hands, and walked away. I did not argue. I did not beg. I simply packed a bag and left that very night. The next morning, she was not waking up to a quiet house. She was waking up to the police pounding on her door to seize her car, her credit cards declining at the grocery store, and the lights in her mansion flickering out one by one. She thought she was kicking out a helpless pensioner. She forgot that before I retired, I was a forensic auditor for the IRS. I spent 40 years hunting down billionaires who thought they were untouchable. Breaking a greedy waitress like her was not going to be a challenge. It was going to be a hobby. Before I tell you how I dismantled her life with a single signature, let me know which city you are tuning in from in the comments below. The rain in Seattle does not wash things away. It just makes the mud heavier. Standing there at the cemetery, watching the mahogany casket lower into the ground, I felt a weight on my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. Brandon was only 38. A stroke, the doctors said. Overwork and stress, I corrected them in my mind. My son had worked himself into an early grave, trying to fund a lifestyle he could not afford, all to please a woman who was currently checking her watch. As if this burial were a dentist appointment, she was anxious to leave. I took a handful of soil. It was cold and gritty. As I tossed it onto the wood, the sound was a dull thud that echoed in the silence. That was when Monica made her move. She stepped up beside me, draped in a designer black dress that probably cost more than my first car. She put a hand on my shoulder. To the dozen or so people watching from under their umbrellas, it looked like a gesture of comfort. It looked like a grieving widow supporting her father-in-law. But I could smell the expensive perfume masking the scent of gin on her breath. "Listen to me closely." "Doug," she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear over the rhythm of the falling rain. "I know Brandon let you stay in the guest suite out of pity after your wife died, but the charity ride ends today. I am putting the house on the market next month. You have 20 days to pack your things and find a nursing home, or a bridge. I do not care which." I turned my head slowly to look at her. Her eyes were dry. There was no redness, no puffiness, just a cold, calculating stare. Behind her, about 20 yards back, half hidden by a large oak tree, I saw a man. He was wearing a tight black t-shirt that struggled to contain his steroid-fueled muscles. He was holding a cigarette, looking impatient. I recognized him. Jax, the personal trainer. The man my son had paid to help Monica get in shape, unaware that they were exercising more than just cardio while Brandon was at the office. I looked back at Monica. She expected me to crumble. She expected the frail old man to fall to his knees and plead for mercy. She did not know that I had already seen the credit card statements. She did not know I had seen the hotel receipts. She thought silence was weakness. "I understand," I said, my voice steady. My heart was breaking for my son, but my mind was already shifting gears. The grieving father was stepping back, and the forensic auditor was stepping forward. "Good," she said, patting my shoulder one last time with a condescending tap. "Do not make this difficult. I want the guest suite cleared out. I need to stage it for the open house." She turned and walked toward the waiting limousine, her hips swaying intentionally. The muscle man by the tree crushed his cigarette under his boot and followed her to the car, slipping into the back seat right beside her. They did not even wait for the priest to finish the final prayer. The drive back to the house was silent. I drove my own car, a 10-year-old sedan, that Monica constantly complained was an eyesore in the driveway. The house in question was a sprawling 4-bedroom estate in the hills. It was magnificent. It was also a lie. 10 years ago, when Brandon begged me for help to buy it, I had put down 80% of the payment. I let him put the deed in his name so he could feel like a man, so he could feel like a provider for his new wife. But I was not a fool. I had prepared a safety net, a document buried deep in my files that I prayed I would never have to use. Today, that prayer went unanswered. When I entered the living room, the atmosphere was jarring. This was supposed to be a reception for close family and friends to honor Brandon. Instead, it felt like a cocktail party. Music was playing softly, but it was upbeat jazz completely inappropriate for the occasion. Caterers were passing around shrimp cocktails. Monica was in the center of the room holding a glass of wine, laughing at something a neighbor said. When she saw me enter, her face shifted instantly into a mask of solemn tragedy. "Oh, Doug," she called out, her voice pitching up an octave to ensure everyone heard. "I am so glad you made it back safely. I was just telling the Johnsons how worried I am about you." She walked over, hooking her arm through mine. Her grip was tight, painful. She steered me toward the center of the room. "Everyone listen up for a moment," she announced, clinking a spoon against her glass. The room went quiet. I want to make a toast to Brandon, but also to his father, Doug. I stood there feeling the eyes of 30 people on me. I saw my grandson Leo sitting in the corner on the stairs. He was 8 years old, still wearing his little suit, clutching a wooden toy I had carved for him. He looked terrified. He was the only other person in this house who was actually mourning. Doug and I had a long talk at the cemetery, Monica lied smoothly, and he has made a brave decision. He has decided that this house is just too full of memories for him. He wants to move into a retirement community to be around people his own age. He will be moving out in a few weeks. A murmur of approval went through the room. How sensible. How noble. I am going to miss him terribly. Monica continued squeezing my arm until her nails dug into my skin. But we have to respect his wishes. Right. Doug, this was the trap. If I denied it now, I would look like a senile, difficult old man causing a scene at his son's funeral. She was using social pressure to force my compliance. She was smarter than I gave her credit for. But she was tactical, not strategic. She was winning the battle, but she had just started a war she could not afford. I looked at her, then I looked at Leo in the corner. I gave the boy a small wink. "That is correct, Monica," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "I think it is time for a change. I will actually be leaving sooner than that. I do not want to be a burden." Monica's eyes widened slightly in surprise, then flashed with triumph. She thought she had broken me. She thought I was rolling over. "Excellent," she whispered as the guests went back to their drinks. "I have the papers ready in the study. Just a formality to say you are leaving voluntarily, so I do not have to deal with eviction laws. Sign them and you can take whatever fits in your car." I walked to the study. This was the room where Brandon had died. He had collapsed right there by the mahogany desk. The room still smelled like him, a mix of old paper and cedar. I did not pack photos. I did not pack clothes. I walked straight to the large Persian rug in the center of the room and kicked the corner aside. Underneath was a floor safe. Monica did not know the combination. She had complained for years that Brandon kept secrets. I spun the dial. Left to 24. Right to 10. Left to 5. The heavy click of the lock opening was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. Inside there was no cash. There were no jewels. There was only a thick file folder and a red USB drive. I took them both. I slipped the USB drive into my pocket and opened the folder. On top was the promissory note and the deed of trust secured by the property. You see, in the world of finance, possession is 9/10 of the law, but documentation is the bullet in the gun. When I gave Brandon the money for this house, I did not give it as a gift. I structured it as a callable loan, a loan that was technically in default the moment he died. The door to the study opened. Monica walked in holding a single sheet of paper. Jax was leaning against the doorframe behind her, smirking. "Here," she said, slapping the paper on the desk. "It basically says you are vacating the premises of your own free will, and you waive any rights to tenancy. Sign it, and you can go." I read the document. It was crude, likely downloaded from a free legal website, but it was binding enough to keep the police from stopping her if she changed the locks. I picked up a pen. "Are you sure about this, Monica?" I asked, looking her in the eye one last time. "Once I sign this, I am gone. And whatever happens next happens." "Just sign it." Old man Jax grunted from the doorway. "We have plans." I looked at the pen. In my career, I had signed audits that sent men to federal prison for 20 years. I had signed seizure orders that stripped corporations of their assets. But this signature felt different. This was not just paperwork. This was the pulling of a pin on a grenade. I signed my name, Douglas Edward Caldwell. I pushed the paper toward her. She snatched it up like a starving dog grabbing a bone. Finally, she laughed. "Now get your stuff. I want you gone before the guests leave. It would be embarrassing for them to see you dragging boxes." I stood up. I picked up my small leather satchel containing the file and the USB. "I am already packed," I said. I walked past her. I walked past Jax, who puffed out his chest as I passed, trying to intimidate me. I felt nothing but pity for him. He was a parasite attached to a host that was about to die. I walked into the living room and went straight to the stairs. I needed to say goodbye to the only thing that mattered. Leo was still sitting there holding the wooden toy. He looked up at me with big, tear-filled eyes. "Grandpa, are you really leaving?" he asked. I sat down on the step beside him. I lowered my voice so no one else could hear. "I have to go for a little while, Leo. But I need you to be brave. I need you to be a spy for me. Can you do that?" "A spy," he whispered, his interest piqued. "Yes." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned flip phone. I had bought it yesterday. "Keep this hidden, deep in your toy chest. If you ever feel scared or if Mommy's friend Jax is mean to you, you press the number 1 button. It calls me. Do you understand?" He nodded solemnly and slid the phone into his sock. "Good boy." I stood up and walked to the front door. The rain was still pouring outside. I did not look back at the guests. I did not look back at the luxury I had paid for. I walked out to my old sedan, tossed the satchel on the passenger seat, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Monica and Jax standing in the window, raising their wine glasses in a toast. They were celebrating their victory. They were celebrating their freedom. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was not a nursing home. It was Sarah Jenkins, the sharpest attorney in the state, and a woman I had trained myself straight out of law school. "Hello," Sarah's voice was professional, crisp. "Sarah, it is Doug," I said, watching the mansion disappear in my rearview mirror. "Doug, I am so sorry about Brandon. How are you holding up?" "I am fine, Sarah. Listen to me. I need you to execute Protocol 4 immediately." There was a pause on the line. "Protocol 4, Doug, that is the nuclear option. That freezes everything. The bank accounts, the utilities, the credit lines." "Are you sure?" I glanced at the red USB drive sitting on the seat beside me. "I am sure. I want the power cut to the house by tomorrow morning. I want the car reported as stolen if it leaves the driveway. And Sarah, file the lien. Call the note due." I heard the sound of typing on the other end. "It is done, Doug." "What about the grandson? He is the asset we are protecting," I said. "Everyone else is a liability." I hung up the phone. The rain battered the windshield, but for the first time all day I could see clearly. Monica had given me 20 days. I had just given her 12 hours. The clock was ticking, and she did not even know the game had started. The sound of jazz music drifting up from the living room felt like an insult. Downstairs, they were drinking my wine and eating the food I paid for, celebrating the start of their new life. A life without me. Monica had given me 20 days to vacate the premises. It was a generous offer in her mind, a window of time for the old man to pack his boxes and shuffle off into obscurity. But in my line of work, you never give the target time to prepare. You do not warn the tax evader that an audit is coming in 3 weeks. You show up at their door at 6 in the morning while they are still in their pajamas. Surprise is the only leverage that matters. I stood in the center of the guest suite that had been my home for the last 5 years. I did not look around with nostalgia. I looked around with the efficiency of a man clearing a crime scene. I took only 2 suits, my grooming kit, and the framed photo of my late wife, Eleanor. Everything else, the furniture, the books, the clothes, I left behind. Let Monica deal with it. Let her hire a moving crew. I wanted my departure to be as abrupt as a heart attack. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. It was time. My thumb hovered over Sarah Jenkins's number. Sarah was the only person in the world who knew the full extent of my financial architecture. I had trained her to be ruthless, and tonight I needed her to be a shark. I pressed call. She answered on the first ring, despite the late hour. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "we are moving up the timeline. Activate Protocol 4. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Protocol 4 was not a standard legal maneuver. It was a scorched earth policy we had designed years ago as a failsafe back when I first realized Brandon was marrying a woman who loved his wallet more than his heart. Protocol 4. Sarah asked, her voice losing its usual professional detachment. "Doug, are you absolutely certain that kills everything? The utilities, the credit lines, the mortgage auto drafts, the landscapers, the pool maintenance. It shuts down the entire ecosystem of that house." I looked at the door. I could hear Monica's shrill laughter floating up the stairs. She was probably already planning how to redecorate this room. Maybe a walk-in closet for her shoe collection. "I am certain," I replied. "Cut it all, Sarah. I want every service provider to receive a cancellation notice by midnight. I want the direct debits from my accounts to stop immediately. And send the notification to the power company that the account holder has vacated the property and is no longer responsible for the charges, effective immediately." But Doug, Sarah hesitated. "They are still inside." "Exactly," I said. "They want the house. They can have the house. But they do not get the infrastructure that keeps it running. They do not get the electricity I pay for. They do not get the water I pay for. Let us see how much Monica loves this mansion when she cannot turn on the lights or flush the toilet." I hung up the phone. The wheels were in motion. By tomorrow morning, the reality of her independence would hit her like a freight train. I picked up my small suitcase and the satchel containing the red USB drive. I had one last stop to make before I walked out that door. The hallway was dark, the shadows stretching long against the walls. I moved silently toward the room at the end of the hall. Leo's room. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The room smelled of lavender and crayons. A nightlight shaped like a rocket ship cast a soft blue glow over the bed. My grandson was asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was too peaceful for the chaos surrounding him. He was clutching a stuffed bear, his face relaxed, free from the tension that had gripped him during the funeral. I walked over to the bedside table. I did not want to wake him. Goodbyes are for people who intend to stay away, and I had every intention of coming back for him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small wooden toy I had carved myself. It was a tumbler, a Japanese-style Daruma doll, but shaped like a little bear. No matter how hard you pushed it down, the weighted bottom always made it stand back up. I placed it gently on the nightstand next to his lamp. It was a silent message. Resilience, balance, the ability to rise after a fall. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. His skin was warm. "I will fix this, Leo," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I promise you I will fix everything." I backed out of the room, closing the door until it clicked softly shut. That was the hardest part. The rest was just business. I carried my bag down the back stairs, bypassing the main foyer, where the party was still dwindling down. I could hear Jax's voice booming from the kitchen. "Baby, we should definitely knock down that wall," he was saying, his voice thick with arrogance. "Make the kitchen open concept, and get rid of that old man's recliner in the den. It smells like mothballs." I paused in the shadows of the hallway. I tightened my grip on the handle of my suitcase. Knock down the wall. He would not even be able to afford the sledgehammer. I walked out the side door that led to the garage. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold and damp. My sedan was parked next to Monica's gleaming Mercedes, a car that she drove but I legally owned. I resisted the urge to take the keys. No, let the police handle that tomorrow. It would be more dramatic. I tossed my bag into the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The engine started with a low rumble. I did not turn on my headlights until I was at the end of the driveway. As I pulled onto the main road, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house on the hill was blazing with light. Every window was glowing. It looked like a castle. It looked impenetrable. Monica was inside, probably raising another glass of expensive champagne, thinking she had won the lottery. She thought she had bullied an old man into submission. She thought the hard part was over. She had no idea that she was standing on a trapdoor and I had just pulled the lever. I drove toward the city, toward a small furnished apartment I had rented 2 days ago under a shell company name. I did not feel sad. I did not feel lonely. I felt the cold, sharp clarity of a man who was about to execute a perfect plan. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A text message from Sarah. "It is done. Protocol 4 is active. The power company has scheduled a remote disconnect for 8:00 a.m. tomorrow." I allowed myself a small, grim smile. "Sleep well, Monica. Enjoy your last night of comfort. Because when the sun comes up, the real world is coming to visit, and it is going to be very expensive." The sun rose over Seattle with a brilliance that mocked the darkness of the previous day. In the master kitchen of the house on Oak Street, the aroma of expensive imported coffee filled the air. It was a smell that Monica associated with victory. She sat at the marble island wrapped in a silk robe that she had bought with Brandon's credit card 3 months ago. Across from her, Jax was shirtless, eating eggs directly from the skillet, looking very much like a man who thought he had just won the lottery. They were relaxed. They were confident. They believed that the problem of Douglas Caldwell had been solved with a signature and a suitcase. I was not there to see it, but I know exactly how that morning unfolded. I know because I had orchestrated every second of it from my small beige apartment across town. I sat with my own cup of instant coffee looking at the clock. It was 8:15 in the morning. The police shift change had just finished, and the patrol units were starting their rounds. Back at the mansion, Monica took a sip of her latte and smiled at Jax. She probably told him how easy it had been. She probably laughed about how pathetic I looked walking out into the rain. She likely mentioned that she had called the police late last night to report the Mercedes keys as stolen, a little insurance policy to make sure that if I tried to come back, I would be arrested for theft. She thought she was playing chess. She did not realize she was playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. Then came the knock. It was not a polite, neighborly tap. It was the heavy, rhythmic pounding of a fist that is used to command authority. It rattled the stained glass panels of the front door. Monica perked up her eyes, bright with malicious anticipation. She assumed it was the officers returning with the keys, or perhaps returning with me in handcuffs. She winked at Jax, tightened the belt of her robe, and walked to the door with the stride of the lady of the manor. She swung the door open, ready to put on her performance of the grieving, victimized widow. Two uniformed officers stood on the porch. Behind them, a large flatbed tow truck was backing into the driveway, its reverse beeping sound cutting through the morning calm like a countdown. "Officer, thank goodness you are here," Monica said, putting a hand to her chest. "Did you find him? Did you find the old man who took my keys?" The older officer, a sergeant with a face that had seen too many lies to be impressed by hers, looked down at a clipboard. He did not smile. He did not offer condolences. "Are you Monica Caldwell?" he asked, his voice flat. "Yes, that is me," she replied, confused by his tone. "Ma'am, we are not here to find anyone. We are here to recover a stolen vehicle reported by its legal owner, Douglas Caldwell." Monica froze. The smile dropped from her face so fast it was almost audible. She blinked, trying to process the words. "Excuse me. There must be a mistake. That is my car. My husband bought it for me. The old man stole the keys. I filed the report last night." The sergeant shook his head slowly. He held up a copy of the vehicle registration. "Ma'am, according to the State Department of Motor Vehicles, the 2023 Mercedes-Benz S-Class in this driveway is registered solely to a Douglas Edward Caldwell. There is no co-owner. Mr. Caldwell contacted us this morning and provided proof of ownership. He stated that the vehicle is currently being unlawfully retained on this property, and he has requested immediate repossession." Jax, hearing the commotion, had walked up behind Monica. He looked at the tow truck, then at the police. "Hey, wait a minute," he grunted, wiping egg yolk from his lip. "You cannot just take the car. We need that car." The officer looked at Jax with disdain. "Sir, step back. Unless you have a title in your hand with your name on it, this vehicle is leaving." Monica's face turned a shade of red that clashed with her silk robe. Her voice rose to a shriek. "But I reported the keys stolen. He cannot take his own car." The sergeant took a step closer, his demeanor hardening. "That brings me to my next point, Mrs. Caldwell. Filing a false police report is a Class B misdemeanor. You stated on the phone last night that a thief had entered your home and taken the keys. However, Mr. Caldwell informed us that he has always been the primary holder of the keys and the vehicle. If you continue to insist that he stole his own property, we will have to go down to the station and have a very long conversation about perjury and wasting police resources. Do you want to do that today?" The silence that followed was heavy. Monica opened her mouth to argue, but the reality of the situation clamped her throat shut. She looked at the registration document in the officer's hand. She saw the name Douglas Caldwell in black and white. It was undeniable. All those times she had bragged to her friends about her car, all those times she had posted photos posing on the hood she had been posing on my property. Brandon had never transferred the title. He couldn't. I had paid for it. "Go ahead and hook it up," the sergeant signaled to the tow truck driver. The sound of heavy chains dragging across the pavement was excruciating for her. It was the sound of her status being stripped away. The driver hooked the winch to the undercarriage of the pristine silver sedan. With a mechanical whine, the car was lifted into the air. The Mercedes emblem gleamed in the sunlight one last time before the car was tilted at a 45-degree angle, looking like a captured beast. Jack stepped onto the porch, his face twisting in annoyance. "Monica, are you kidding me?" he hissed, forgetting the police were right there. "How am I supposed to get to the gym? My truck is in the shop. You said the car was yours." "Shut up, Jax!" Monica snapped, her eyes fixed on the departing tow truck. "Just shut up." She turned back to the officer, trying to salvage some dignity. "Fine. Take the car. It is just a car. I will buy a new one tomorrow. My husband left me plenty of money." The sergeant just tipped his cap. "Have a nice day, ma'am. And I suggest you do not file any more false reports. We will be watching." The officers turned and walked back to their cruiser. The tow truck roared to life, carrying away the symbol of her suburban royalty. Monica stood there on the porch, shivering in the cool morning air. For the first time, she felt exposed. The neighbors were watching from their windows, peering through their blinds. The perfect facade was cracking. She slammed the front door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. "This is ridiculous," Jax complained, walking back toward the kitchen. "The old man is petty. He is just trying to scare you." "He is trying to humiliate me," Monica said, her voice trembling with rage. "He wants me to beg." "Well, I won't. I have the house. I have the insurance money coming. I don't need his stupid car." She marched back into the kitchen, needing caffeine to calm her nerves. She grabbed her mug and walked to the expensive Italian espresso machine built into the wall. She pressed the button for a double shot. Nothing happened. She pressed it again. The digital display remained black. The quiet hum of the machine was absent. She frowned and looked up at the ceiling. The recessed lights were dead. The refrigerator, usually humming with a soft vibration, was silent. The house was completely quiet. "Jax, did you trip a breaker?" she called out. Jax was standing by the microwave, tapping the buttons aggressively. "Nothing is working," he said, looking around. "The microwave is dead. The toaster is dead. Even the Wi-Fi router lights are off." Monica felt a cold pit form in her stomach, colder than the morning air. She ran to the wall switch and flipped it up and down. Click, click. Nothing. She pulled out her phone. She saw the signal bars were weak, but she managed to open her banking app. She needed to check if the electric bill had been paid. Brandon usually handled the autopay. As the app loaded, a notification popped up on her screen. It was from the utility company. "Service disconnected. Request by account holder Douglas Caldwell. Reason vacated property." The phone slipped from her fingers and landed on the counter with a clatter. The realization hit her harder than the loss of the car. The car was a luxury. Electricity was survival. Jax looked at her, his patience wearing thin. "Monica, what is going on? Why is the power out?" She looked at him, her face pale. "He cut it," she whispered. "He cut everything." "But we have money, right?" Jax asked, stepping closer. "Just pay the bill. Use the credit card." Monica picked up her phone again. She opened her digital wallet. She tried to make a small payment to the electric company to restore service. Declined. She tried another card. Declined. She tried the joint account she shared with Brandon. Account frozen. She looked around the beautiful, expansive kitchen. Without the warm lighting, without the hum of appliances, it suddenly felt very large and very cold. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow longer. "He did not just leave," Monica said, her voice barely a whisper. "He is hunting us." The house was no longer a trophy. It was a tomb. And for the first time, Monica realized that the man she had kicked out was not a helpless old victim. He was the architect of her entire life, and he had just decided to demolish the building while she was still inside. After the tow truck dragged the Mercedes away, Monica did what she always did when faced with a problem she could not scream at. She went shopping. She called a rideshare service, fuming in the back seat of a Toyota Camry that smelled of stale pine air freshener, and directed the driver to the most expensive organic grocery store in the city. In her mind, the best revenge was living well. She was going to throw a dinner party tonight for Jax. She was going to cook steaks that cost more than my first car and drink wine that was older than she was. She wanted to prove to herself, and perhaps to the ghost of my presence, that she was untouchable. I watched her transaction history from my laptop screen in my new apartment. I had not cut the cards yet. I wanted her to fill the cart first. I wanted her to feel the weight of the luxury items. I wanted her to stand in that checkout line surrounded by the suburban elite she desperately tried to emulate before I pulled the rug out. She walked through the aisles, tossing items into the cart with reckless abandon. imported truffles, aged Wagyu beef, 3 bottles of vintage Pinot Noir. She was not just buying food. She was buying reassurance. She was building a fortress of consumerism to protect her fragile ego. When she reached the register, the total came to $842. She pulled out the black platinum card. It was a heavy card metal designed to make a satisfying clatter when dropped on a counter. She smiled at the cashier, a young woman who looked tired, and tapped the card against the reader. Processing. I waited. On my screen, the authorization request appeared. It was blinking green, waiting for the bank's automated approval. But the bank was not in charge today. I was. I moved my mouse cursor over the small red button labeled Deactivate Authorized User. Click. Back in the store, the machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant sound that cut through the ambient jazz music. The cashier frowned and looked at the screen. "I am sorry, ma'am," the cashier said, her voice loud enough for the woman behind Monica to hear. "It says declined." Monica laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Do not be silly. Run it again. It is probably just a chip error. This card has a $50,000 limit." The cashier sighed and inserted the card again. "Declined. Call issuer." The line behind Monica was growing. People were shifting their weight, checking their watches. The judgment was palpable. For a woman like Monica, who measured her worth by the envy of others, this was not just an inconvenience. It was a social execution. "Here, try this one," Monica snapped, pulling out a second card. The gold rewards card. I was ready for that. I had already flagged that card as lost or stolen 5 minutes ago. Declined. Pickup card. The cashier looked at Monica with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Ma'am, do you have another form of payment? Or perhaps cash?" Monica did not carry cash. Cash was for poor people. Cash was for people like me. She stood there, her face flushing a deep, humiliating crimson. She looked at the Wagyu beef. She looked at the wine. She looked at the people staring at her. "There must be a mistake," she hissed, grabbing her purse. "My husband left me this money. The bank is making a mistake." The mistake, Monica was thinking, that money belonged to Brandon. Here's the truth that Monica never bothered to learn because she was too busy spending. Brandon went bankrupt 2 years ago. My son, God rest his soul, was a dreamer, but he was a terrible businessman. He leveraged himself to the hilt, trying to start a tech consultancy that had no clients. When the creditors came knocking, he came to me weeping at my kitchen table. He was going to lose everything. The house, the cars, and most importantly, he was going to lose you, Monica. He told me that you would leave him if the money stopped flowing. So I made a deal with him. I became his financial life support. I paid off his debts. I secured the credit lines with my own portfolio. Every credit card in that wallet was an authorized user card linked to my credit score, not his. Brandon's credit score was barely high enough to rent a carpet cleaner. Mine was 850. I let him keep the illusion. I let him pretend he was the provider because a father wants his son to feel like a man. But you, Monica, you were just a guest at the banquet I was funding. And guests who kick out the host do not get to keep eating. She had to leave the cart. She had to walk away from the groceries head down while the cashier began the tedious process of restocking the items. The walk of shame out of that sliding glass door was the first real step she had taken into the real world in years. While she was waiting for another rideshare to take her back to the mansion, I decided it was time to finish the job. I minimized the banking window and opened the utility portal. The house on Oak Street was a smart home. Everything was connected. The thermostat, the security cameras, the irrigation system, even the refrigerator. It all relied on 2 things, electricity and the internet. I looked at the water bill first. It was overdue by 2 days. Usually, I would just auto-pay it. Today, I clicked on the Move Out service request. I selected the option for immediate termination of service, Then the internet provider. This was the fiber optic gigabit connection that allowed Jax to stream his movies and Monica to post her high-resolution lies on Instagram. Cancel service. Reason account holder, deceased, relocated. Confirm. Finally, the electricity. The previous night I had sent the notice, but the automated system sometimes had a lag. I called the emergency shutoff line. I told them the house was undergoing major electrical renovation and needed to be de-energized immediately for safety reasons. It was amazing how much damage you could do with a laptop and a verify identity password. By the time Monica's ride pulled up to the driveway, the house was already dying. She walked up the steps, key in hand, fumbling with the lock, because the smart lock keypad was dead. She had to use the physical key, something she probably hadn't done since they moved in. She pushed the door open. The silence hit her first. No hum of the refrigerator. No ambient noise from the HVAC system. The house was rapidly matching the temperature of the outside air. She flipped the light switch in the foyer. Nothing. She walked into the kitchen. Jax was sitting at the table scrolling on his phone, looking frustrated. "The Wi-Fi is gone," he complained without looking up. "I am using my data, but the signal in here is trash, and the water pressure is 0. I tried to take a shower, and it just dribbled out and stopped." Monica dropped her purse on the counter. She did not scream. She was past screaming. She was starting to understand the geometry of the trap she was in. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Doug." Jax stood up, flexing his arms uselessly. "So what we call the companies. We turn it back on. We put it in your name." Monica looked at him, and for the first time she saw him for what he was. Useless. "You do not understand, Jax. You need a credit check to open utility accounts. You need a deposit. I just tried to buy groceries and my cards were declined. All of them." Jax's face changed. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the primitive fear of a parasite realizing the host is dead. "What do you mean?" "Declined," he asked, his voice rising. "You said you were rich. You said Brandon left you millions." Monica slumped onto a bar stool. "I thought he did. But I think Doug owns it all." She looked around the darkening kitchen. The sun was setting, and the shadows were claiming the room. Without power, the massive house was just a cavern. Without water, the luxury bathrooms were just tiled closets. Without the internet, they were isolated from the world that validated their existence. She reached for her phone to call her lawyer, the cheap one she had found online. But as she looked at the screen, she saw the battery was at 4%. She instinctively reached for the charging cable plugged into the island outlet. She plugged it in. The lightning bolt icon did not appear. She stared at the dead outlet. Then she stared at the dead refrigerator, where the food was already starting to spoil. "He is not just kicking us out," she said, her voice trembling. "He is deleting us." That night in my quiet apartment, I ate a simple dinner of soup and bread. It was hot. The lights were warm. The water in my shower was steaming. I slept soundly, knowing that 5 miles away, Monica and Jax were sitting in the dark in a cold house, realizing that the golden goose had not only stopped laying eggs, but it had also flown away with the nest. And tomorrow I would introduce them to the concept of the forensic audit. Because taking their comfort was just the appetizer. Taking their freedom would be the main course. The silence in the house on Oak Street was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that amplifies every creak of the floorboards and every ragged breath of two people who are realizing they are trapped. By the second day without electricity, the romance between Monica and Jax had evaporated, replaced by the primitive irritation of physical discomfort. The mansion designed to be a climate-controlled paradise had turned into a tomb. The expensive insulation that kept the heat out in the summer was now keeping the cold dampness in. I sat in my apartment, reviewing the security logs from the battery-operated backup system that I had never told Brandon about. The cameras were still rolling, capturing the decay of their relationship in high definition. I watched Jax pacing the living room. He was wearing 3 layers of designer sweatshirts, but he was shivering. He was not built for adversity. He was a man who required constant validation and comfort, and right now he was getting neither. "This is insane," Jax shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We cannot live like this, Monica. I cannot charge my phone. I cannot shower. I smell like a locker room. You said you were handling it." Monica was sitting on the sofa wrapped in a cashmere blanket that looked ridiculous against her pale, unwashed face. She looked exhausted. The stress of the last 48 hours had aged her. "I am trying, Jax," she snapped back. "I called the power company 3 times. They said the account is closed. I need to open a new one, but they want a deposit because of my credit score." "Your credit score is trash," Jax spat out. He walked over to the window and looked out at the street, as if hoping a rescue helicopter would appear. "Look, we need money. Real money. Not promises." Monica looked up at him. "What do you want me to do, Rob?" "A bank, sell the house," Jack said, turning around with a manic gleam in his eyes. Monica hesitated. "Sell it, but Brandon wanted me to have it." "Brandon is dead, Monica," Jax yelled, throwing his hands up. "And the old man is gone. This place is worth what? 2 million, maybe 3. We sell it fast. We take the cash. We move to LA or Miami. Somewhere warm. Somewhere with lights." I saw the gears turning in Monica's head. She looked around the dark room. She looked at the dead fireplace. She realized that without my money to maintain it, this house was just a giant anchor dragging her down. The idea of millions of dollars in her bank account liquid and ready to spend was the drug she needed. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's sell it." She used the last bit of battery on her phone to call a real estate agent she knew from her social circle. A woman named Linda, who specialized in luxury properties and quick turnovers. Linda arrived 2 hours later. She drove a gold Lexus and wore a suit that cost more than my first year's salary at the IRS. She stepped into the cold foyer and wrinkled her nose slightly at the smell of stale air, but she regained her professional composure quickly. "Monica, darling." "I am so sorry for your loss," Linda said, giving her a brief air-kiss embrace. "But I admire your strength. Moving on is the healthiest thing you can do." "Let's just get this done, Linda," Monica said, her voice tight. "I want to list it immediately. Cash buyers only. I want a quick close." Linda walked through the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She took notes on her iPad. She praised the granite countertops. She admired the view from the master balcony. She calculated her commission with every step. Jax trailed behind them, nodding enthusiastically, already spending the money in his head. He was probably thinking about a new truck, maybe a boat. "The house is in stunning condition despite the current utility situation," Linda said, as they gathered back in the kitchen. "The market is hot right now. Based on the square footage and the location, I think we can list at 2.8 million. If we price it aggressively at 2.5 for a quick sale, we could have multiple offers by the weekend." Jax let out a low whistle. 2.5 million. He grabbed Monica's hand and squeezed it. I could see the greed radiating off him like heat waves. "Do it," Monica said. "List it." "Wonderful," Linda smiled. "I just need to pull the official property records to confirm the legal description and check for any standard encumbrances. It will just take a moment." Linda opened her laptop. Since there was no Wi-Fi, she connected to her own cellular hotspot. The blue light of the screen illuminated their 3 faces. Monica and Jax were leaning in, breathless. This was their ticket out. This was their victory. I leaned forward in my chair, too. This was the moment. Linda typed in the address. 42 Oak Street. She scrolled through the county assessor's database. She hummed a little tune as she worked. Then the humming stopped. Her fingers froze on the trackpad. She squinted at the screen. She scrolled down, then scrolled back up. The professional smile on her face faltered. "Is there a problem?" Jax asked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Linda cleared her throat. She looked at Monica with a confused expression. "Monica, were you aware of the title status of this property?" "Of course," Monica said defensively. "My husband left it to me." "It is in the will." "Yes, the ownership transferred to you," Linda said slowly. "But the equity, that is a different story." "What are you talking about?" Monica demanded. Linda turned the laptop screen around so they could see. She pointed to a line highlighted in red at the bottom of the deed record. "Right here," Linda said. "There is a primary lien on the property, a deed of trust filed 10 years ago and updated yesterday." "Updated yesterday," Monica's voice was a whisper. "Yes," Linda continued. "The property is used as collateral for a private loan. The principal amount plus accrued interest." "Oh my." "How much?" Jax barked. "How much is the loan?" Linda adjusted her glasses. "The lien is held by a private entity called DC Holdings LLC. The total amount due upon the death of the primary borrower is $850,000. Plus there is a secondary clause here. It says if the property is vacated or utilities are disconnected, the lender has the right to accelerate the debt and initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings." The room went silent. The number hung in the cold air. $850,000. "But," Monica stammered. "Brandon said he owned the house. He said his dad helped with the down payment, but—" "It appears his father did not give him the money," Linda said, her voice cooling considerably. "He loaned it to him and secured it against the house. This DC Holdings, I am guessing DC stands for Douglas Caldwell." Monica slumped against the counter. The color drained from her face. "So what does that mean?" Jax asked, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "We sell it for $2.5 million, pay the old man his $800,000, and we still keep over $1.5 million. Right. We are still rich." Linda shook her head sadly. She tapped another key. "I am afraid not. You see, since the loan was accelerated yesterday, due to the death of the borrower, penalty, interest has kicked in. But the bigger problem is the second lien." "Second lien?" Monica shrieked. "Yes. It appears there is a second judgment against the property filed by the IRS for unpaid back taxes by Brandon Caldwell, totaling $400,000. And a third lien from a business venture, something called Tech Start Ventures, for another $600,000. Linda did the math on the calculator app. "Monica, if we sell this house today for $2.5 million after paying off the mortgages, the liens, the back taxes, and the closing costs, you might walk away with, let me see." She tapped the equal sign. "Maybe $20,000. Best case scenario." "20,000, Jax roared. He kicked the kitchen island so hard the wood splintered. "We are supposed to be millionaires." Linda stood up and closed her laptop. She sensed the violence in the air and knew it was time to leave. "I am sorry, Monica. I cannot list a home with this much title distress. It is a legal nightmare. If I were you, I would find a lawyer. Good luck." She gathered her things and walked out the door, leaving them in the darkening kitchen. Jax turned on Monica slowly. His face was not handsome anymore. It was twisted, ugly, and mean. "You lied to me," he whispered. "You said you had it all handled. You said the old man was a pushover." "I didn't know," Monica sobbed. "Brandon never told me about the loans." "Because you never asked." Jax screamed. "You were too busy spending his money to ask where it came from." He grabbed a vase from the counter, a crystal vase I had given Brandon for his wedding, and threw it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. I am not staying in this freezer for $20,000, Jack spat. He stormed out of the kitchen, heading for the stairs. Monica sank to the floor, surrounded by the shards of glass. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth. In my apartment, I took a sip of hot tea. DC Holdings. Douglas Caldwell Holdings. I had set up that LLC 15 years ago to protect my assets. Brandon knew about the loan. He knew the terms. He knew that the house was a cage if he didn't respect the hand that fed him. He had respected it. But Monica. She had tried to bite the hand. She just found out that the hand was made of iron. I watched Jax on the monitor. He wasn't packing to leave. He was rummaging through the drawers in the master bedroom. He was looking for jewelry. He was looking for anything he could pawn. The rats were turning on each other. It was time for the next step. They thought the financial ruin was the bottom. They did not know that I had not even started on the legal front. I opened my email and saw a notification from the court clerk. The restraining order hearing was scheduled. Monica wanted to play the victim. I was about to show the judge that she was the villain, and I had the perfect witness. A witness she had forgotten about in her panic. My grandson. Desperation has a specific flavor. It tastes like cold coffee in a waiting room that smells of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. That was the atmosphere Monica found herself in the morning after the realtor walked out. With her credit cards frozen and her bank accounts locked, she could not hire a top-tier firm from the downtown skyscrapers. She could not hire the kind of shark who plays golf with judges. Instead, she found herself in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner sitting across from a man named Reynolds who advertised his services on the back of bus stop benches. I knew Reynolds. In my days at the IRS, I had audited 3 of his clients. He was the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances and helped people file bankruptcy when they bought jet skis they could not afford. He was exactly the kind of legal representation Monica deserved. I was not in the room, obviously, but I received the digital notification the moment Reynolds accessed the public records for the property on Oak Street. My system flagged the inquiry. It told me exactly what document he was looking at. He was pulling the Articles of Incorporation for DC Holdings, LLC. I can picture the scene perfectly. Monica and Jack sitting in creaking faux leather chairs looking at Reynolds with the desperate hope of drowning sailors spotting a piece of driftwood. They wanted him to tell them that the lien was a mistake. They wanted him to tell them that they could sue the evil corporation that was trying to steal their house. Mr. Reynolds, Monica likely said, twisting her diamond ring, the one I paid for, around her finger. This company, DC Holdings, they are claiming a lien on my house. But my husband said the house was ours. We need you to file a suit to remove it. It must be fraudulent. Reynolds probably adjusted his cheap tie, squinting at the computer screen as the file downloaded. He was looking for a loophole. He was looking for a filing error, a missing signature, a lapsed renewal date. Anything to justify his $500 consultation fee. But he would not find an error. I do not make errors. Let me see here, Reynolds mumbled, scrolling through the PDF. DC Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware, asset management and private lending. Who are they? Jax demanded, tapping his foot impatiently. Some bank, some hedge fund. Reynolds scrolled down to the bottom of the page to the section labeled Registered Agent and Managing Member. He stopped. He blinked. He leaned closer to the screen, probably cleaning his glasses to make sure he was seeing it right. Mrs. Caldwell Reynolds said, his voice losing its confident bluster. Are you aware of who owns this company? Monica snapped. That is why we hired you. Who is it? Reynolds turned the monitor around. The managing member is Douglas Edward Caldwell. The silence in that cheap office must have been deafening. It was the sound of the last thread of hope snapping. Douglas, Monica whispered. You mean my father-in-law? Yes, Reynolds confirmed. It appears your father-in-law incorporated this company 10 years ago, and this company is the legal holder of the mortgage on your home. It cannot be, she insisted, her voice rising in hysteria. Brandon said he bought the house. He said his dad helped him, but he said he bought it. And this is where the past comes rushing in to collide with the present. This is the part of the story that Monica never bothered to ask about, and Brandon was too ashamed to admit. 10 years ago, my son came to me with a proposal. He was 28, fresh out of business school, and blindly in love with a woman I knew was trouble the moment she walked into our lives. Monica wanted the lifestyle before they had earned the money. She wanted the Oak Street house. It was over budget. It was reckless. But Brandon was desperate to be the hero she wanted. He sat in my study, the same study I had just emptied 2 days ago, and asked me for $800,000. He called it an investment in his future. He promised he would pay me back when his business took off. I looked at my son. I loved him, but I also saw his weakness. I saw how he let Monica spend money he did not have. I knew that if I just gave him the cash, it would be gone in 5 years, and the house would be foreclosed on by a bank that did not care about his last name. So I told him no. I will not give you the money. Brandon, I said, I will lend it to you. I created DC Holdings LLC the next day. I drafted a deed of trust. It was not a standard family loan. It was a commercial instrument, ironclad and unforgiving. I sat Brandon down and made him read every word. This is a callable note, I explained to him. It means the company me can demand full repayment under specific conditions. And there is a clause here, Brandon. Clause 14B. I remember his face as he read it. He looked up at me, hurt. Dad, this says that if I die, the loan is immediately due in full. Why would you do that? Because, son, I told him, if you die, I want to make sure your assets are protected from people who might not have your best interests at heart. If you die, I do not want a bank taking this house. I want to be the one holding the keys. He signed it. He signed it because he thought he was going to live forever. He signed it because he thought I was just being a grumpy old accountant. He never told Monica the details. He just told her dad handled the down payment. Back in the office, Reynolds was now reading Clause 14B out loud to a horrified Monica. Upon the death of the primary borrower, the entirety of the principal balance plus any accrued interest becomes immediately due and payable. Failure to remit payment within 30 days constitutes a default event granting the lender the right to immediate possession and foreclosure. Reynolds looked up. Mrs. Caldwell, this is bad. This is very bad. The 30-day clock started the moment your husband's heart stopped. But 30 days, Monica stammered. I cannot raise $800,000 in 30 days. Actually, Reynolds corrected, checking the calendar. It has been 10 days since he passed. You have 20 days left. 20 days. The same number she had given me. The irony was poetic. There has to be a way out. Jax interjected, his muscles useless against the weight of contract law. Can we sue for, I don't know, emotional distress? Predatory lending? Reynolds shook his head. This is not predatory. The interest rate is actually below market value. It was a generous loan. But the terms are clear. Douglas Caldwell is not just your father-in-law. He is your senior secured creditor. He is the bank. And unlike Wells Fargo or Chase, he does not have a customer service department you can cry to. Monica stood up. She was shaking. He planned this, she whispered. He knew. All this time he let us live there, acting like a grandfather, but he was just waiting to pull the trigger. No, Monica. I was not waiting. I was hoping I would never have to. I was hoping my son would outlive me. I was hoping he would pay off the loan and own the house free and clear. I wanted to tear up that contract. But when he died, and when you showed your true face at his funeral, the contract became my only weapon. Reynolds closed the folder. Look, Mrs. Caldwell, I will be honest. I cannot help you. You are trying to fight a forensic auditor on his own turf. This document is bulletproof. My advice, pack your bags. Sell whatever furniture you can. And leave before he sends the sheriff. Monica stared at him. I cannot leave, she said, her voice hollow. I have nowhere to go. That is not entirely true, Reynolds said, handing her back the papers. You have 20 days to find somewhere. That is more notice than most people get. She walked out of that office into the bright, harsh sunlight of the strip mall parking lot. Jax was yelling at her, blaming her, asking why she didn't know about the company. She wasn't listening. She was realizing that the enemy wasn't a faceless institution. The enemy was the quiet man who sat at her dinner table for 5 years, the man she had mocked, the man she had underestimated. She realized that DC Holdings was not just a company. It was a judgment. Back in my apartment, I closed the notification window. The meeting was over. Reynolds had done his job perfectly, explaining the gravity of her situation better than I ever could. But I was not done. The house was just the battlefield. The war was about the legacy. I opened a new file on my computer. This one was labeled Life Insurance Policy 49204. Monica thought the house was the big loss. She was counting on the $1 million payout from Brandon's life insurance to start her new life. She had probably already spent half of it in her head. She did not know that 3 days before he died, Brandon had come to see me one last time. He was sick, he was tired, and he finally admitted the truth about his marriage. He had signed a change of beneficiary form right there at my kitchen table. I looked at the digital copy of the policy. The beneficiary was not Monica Caldwell. It was the Leo Caldwell Irrevocable Trust. She was fighting for a house she could not keep, waiting for money she would never receive. The trap was closing, and the next time she tried to open a door, she would find only a brick wall built by her own greed. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold, but unlike Monica's desperation, it tasted like justice. The banging on my apartment door started at 8:14 in the evening. It was not a knock. It was a physical assault on the wood frame. I was sitting in my armchair, a book on forensic accounting, open on my lap, a cup of herbal tea steaming on the side table. I did not jump. I did not rush to the peephole. I had been expecting this. When you corner a wild animal, it does not sit down and negotiate. It attacks the nearest thing it perceives as a threat. Monica had just learned that her house was not an asset, but a liability, and she had come to demand that I rewrite reality. Open this door, Doug. Her voice was shrill, distorted by the thick wood and her own hysteria. I know you are in there. You cannot do this to me. You cannot just steal my life. I closed my book and placed it gently on the table. I walked to the door, but I did not unlock it. I looked through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted her face, but the rage was clear. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared. She looked nothing like the composed, arrogant woman who had stood by my son's grave 2 days ago. She looked like a woman who was drowning and trying to climb onto the person she had pushed off the boat. Doug, I know you can hear me. Open the door or I will break it down. She kicked the door. A dull thud echoed through the small apartment complex. I could hear doors opening down the hallway. My neighbors were curious. This was good. Witnesses are the currency of the legal system. I leaned close to the door, speaking calmly, but loud enough for her to hear. Monica, go home. We have nothing to discuss. The paperwork is clear. Screw the paperwork, she screamed, pounding the wood with both fists now. You tricked Brandon. You trapped us. You need to sign a release. You need to forgive the debt. Right now, I stepped back. Forgive the debt. It was such a fascinating concept coming from her. She wanted financial forgiveness, but she had never offered a shred of emotional forgiveness to anyone in her life. She wanted mercy, but she dealt in cruelty. I am not opening the door, Monica, I said. If you do not leave, I will call the police. "Call them," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I don't care. Let them come. I will tell them you are stealing my inheritance. I will tell them you are abusing a widow." She was losing control. She was thrashing against the door now, sobbing and screaming in turns. It was a tantrum, pure and simple. A tantrum from a woman who had never been told no. I pulled out my phone. I did not call Sarah. I dialed 911. "Emergency services, what is your situation? My name is Douglas Caldwell. I am at the Pine Grove Apartments, Unit 4B. There is a woman attempting to break down my door. She is screaming threats and appears to be in an altered state. I fear for my safety." I gave the operator the details calmly. I did not sound angry. I sounded like an elderly man under siege, which, legally speaking, I was. I waited by the door. The pounding continued for another 5 minutes, then slowly turned into sobbing. She slid down the door, leaning against it, crying about how unfair the world was. I stood on the other side, listening to her weep. A part of me, the part that was still a father, felt a twinge of pity. But then I remembered the way she had looked at my grandson at the funeral, ignoring him to check her phone. I remembered Jax. I remembered the 20-day deadline. The pity evaporated. When the police arrived, they did not arrive with sirens. 2 officers walked up the stairs. I watched through the peephole as they approached her. Monica was sitting on the doormat, her head in her hands. "Ma'am," one officer said, "you need to stand up." Monica looked up, her eyes wild. "You have to help me. He is in there. He is a thief. He stole my house, ma'am. We have a report that you are attempting to force entry and threatening the resident." The officer said, his voice firm, "You need to step away from the door." She stood up, pointing a shaking finger at my door. "He is the criminal. Arrest him, ma'am. Lower your voice. Do you live here?" "No, he lives here. He is hiding." "Okay, so you are disturbing the peace and trespassing. We need to see some ID." "I don't have my ID," Monica yelled. "He cut off my money. He took my car." The situation escalated quickly. Monica, exhausted and humiliated, made the mistake of shoving the officer's hand away when he tried to guide her toward the stairs. That was the tipping point. In the state of Washington, assaulting an officer, even a minor shove, is a one-way ticket to a holding cell. I watched as they turned her around. I watched the metal cuffs click onto her wrists. The sound was distinct, sharper than the pounding on the door had been. "You cannot arrest me. Do you know who I am?" she screamed as they led her away. I knew who she was. She was a woman who had just spent her first night of the 20-day countdown in a county jail cell. They would hold her for 24 hours for a cooling-off period and mental evaluation. I waited until the hallway was silent. Then I went to the kitchen and poured the tea down the sink. It had gone cold. But my night was not over. With Monica in custody, a new variable had entered the equation. A dangerous variable. Jax. Jax was alone in the house on Oak Street. And more importantly, Jax was alone with Leo. I opened my laptop. The battery-operated security cameras I had installed years ago were motion-activated. They were hidden in the smoke detectors and the bookshelves, a habit from my days tracking assets for the government. I had not told anyone about them, not even Brandon. They were my insurance policy. I logged into the secure server. The feed was grainy, illuminated by the infrared night vision, but clear enough. The house was dark. Shadows loomed in the corners of the living room. I cycled through the cameras. Kitchen. Empty. Hallway. Empty. Then I found them in the living room. Jax was sitting on the expensive leather sofa, illuminated by the flashlight on his phone. He had a bottle of Brandon's scotch on the table, one of the few things he had managed to find in the dark. He was drinking straight from the bottle. Leo was standing near the fireplace. He was wearing his pajamas, hugging the stuffed bear I had seen him with the night I left. He looked tiny in the cavernous dark room. I turned up the volume on my laptop. The microphone picked up the sound of wind against the windows and Jax's heavy breathing. Leo's voice was small, trembling. "I'm hungry. There is no food in the fridge. It smells bad." Jax didn't look up. He took another swig of scotch. "Go to sleep, kid." "I'm scared," Leo said. "It's too dark." "Where is Mommy? Your mommy is an idiot." Jax muttered, his words slurring slightly. "She went to yell at your grandpa. Probably getting us some money." "Hopefully." My hands clenched into fists on my desk. I watched the man my daughter-in-law had chosen over her family. He was a coward, drowning his failure in stolen liquor. "Can we order pizza?" Leo asked, taking a step closer. "With what money?" Jax snapped, finally looking at the boy. His face was lit from below by the phone light, making him look demonic. "Your grandpa cut the cards. We are broke, kid. Get used to it. Go find some crackers or something." "I don't like crackers," Leo whimpered. "I want grandpa." Jax stood up suddenly. The motion was aggressive. Leo flinched, taking a step back. "Shut up about your grandpa," Jax shouted. "He is the reason we are sitting in the dark. He is the reason I can't charge my phone. He is a selfish old man who wants us to suffer." Leo started to cry. Silent tears, just like I had taught him not to make noise when adults were angry. It broke my heart to watch. Jax stared at the boy, then at the empty scotch bottle. He looked at his phone. "I need a drink, a real drink, and I need to find a place with a charger." He grabbed his keys, his truck keys, the one vehicle I couldn't seize. "Where are you going?" Leo asked, panic rising in his voice. "You can't leave me here. It's dark. I am going to the bar," Jax grunted, grabbing his jacket. "I can't deal with your whining in this cold house. Your mom will be back soon. Just stay in your room." "Jax, please." Leo ran forward and grabbed Jax's leg. "Don't go." Jax shook him off. He didn't kick him, but he pushed him away with enough force that Leo stumbled and fell onto the rug. "Get off me," Jax growled. He turned and walked toward the front door. I watched on the camera as he stepped out into the night, slamming the heavy door behind him. The lock clicked. I switched the camera view to the living room. Leo was sitting on the floor in the absolute pitch black of that massive, silent house. He was sobbing now, calling out for his mother, calling out for me. I hit the record button on my screen. Saved. 8:43 p.m. Abandonment of a minor. Endangerment. Emotional abuse. I had the evidence. I had the smoking gun that would strip Monica of custody forever. Leaving an 8-year-old child alone in a house without power, water, or communication, while the mother is in jail and the guardian goes to a bar. No judge in America would look past that. But as I watched Leo curl up into a ball on the rug, clutching his bear, the cold satisfaction of the lawsuit vanished. The forensic auditor disappeared. I was just a grandfather, and my boy was scared. I closed the laptop. I did not call the police this time. The police would take too long. They would hand him over to Child Protective Services. They would put him in a system that might be just as cold as that house. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by the door. "I am coming, Leo," I whispered to the empty apartment. I walked out the door. The speed limit did not matter tonight. The restraining order did not matter tonight. I was going to get my grandson. And if Jax happened to come back while I was there, well, I was 72 years old, but I had grown up on a farm and I knew how to handle pests. This was no longer a financial dispute. This was a rescue mission. The morning after I watched my grandson crying in the dark, the silence in my apartment was heavy. I had expected a call. I had expected an apology. I had even expected a threat. But I did not expect the knock at the door at 9 in the morning. It was not Monica this time. It was a man in a cheap gray suit holding a manila envelope. He did not look me in the eye. He just asked my name, shoved the papers into my chest, and walked away. In my line of work, I have served thousands of notices. I know the weight of a document that changes a life. But my hands shook as I opened this one. It was not a lawsuit over the house. It was not a contest of the will. It was a temporary restraining order. I read the words, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt the room spin. The petitioner, Monica Caldwell, alleged that I, Douglas Caldwell, presented an imminent danger to the minor child, Leo Caldwell. The affidavit claimed that I had a history of volatile outbursts and that I had physically struck the child in the past. I had to sit down. The paper rattled in my grip. Struck him, I had never raised a hand to anyone in my life, let alone the boy who was the center of my universe. I remembered teaching Leo to ride a bike. I remembered holding him when he scraped his knee. I remembered the way he looked at me at the funeral, trusting me to save him. And now this woman, this desperate, clawing creature, was using the law to sever the only bond that mattered. She was not doing this to protect Leo. She was doing it to punish me. She knew she had lost the house. She knew she had lost the money. Leo was the last asset she had, and she was turning him into a weapon. I read further. The order prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of Leo, his school, or his residence. It prohibited all communication, electronic or otherwise. If I called that little flip phone I gave him, I would be arrested. She had checkmated me. She had found the one thing I cared about more than justice, and she held it over a cliff. For 10 minutes, I just sat there. I felt old. I felt defeated. I imagined Leo waking up in that cold house asking for me and Monica telling him that Grandpa wasn't allowed to see him because Grandpa was a bad man. The lie would plant a seed in his mind. That was her goal, to poison his memory of me before I could save him. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city. My reflection in the glass looked gray and tired. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just a bitter old man fighting a war I couldn't win. Maybe I should just let her have the boy and fade away. Then I saw my reflection's eyes. They were not the eyes of a defeated grandfather. They were the eyes of the man who had brought down the largest Ponzi scheme in Seattle history. They were the eyes of a predator who had just been bitten. I turned away from the window and walked to my desk. I swept the restraining order aside. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a file that I had kept sealed for 5 years. It was a thick, dusty binder labeled simply the Caldwell Audit. When Brandon had first married Monica, I had run a background check. It was standard procedure for me. I wanted to know who was entering my family. What I found back then was concerning but not illegal. Bad credit, a few speeding tickets, a history of short-term jobs. I had buried it hoping she would change, hoping she would grow. But now looking at that file, I realized I had been too soft. I had looked at her like a father-in-law, not like an auditor. I had looked for red flags, but I hadn't looked for crimes. I opened my laptop. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing slowed. I was no longer Douglas Caldwell, the grieving father. I was Agent Caldwell, badge number 4920, retired, but still lethal. "You want to play dirty, Monica?" I whispered to the empty room. "You want to use the law to lie, fine. Let us see how you handle the truth when it is printed on government letterhead." I logged into the public databases. I started digging. I did not look for traffic tickets this time. I looked for the money. Monica had always had expensive taste. Even before she met Brandon, she wore clothes she couldn't afford. Where did the money come from? I pulled up her old employment records. She had worked as a receptionist at a boutique medical clinic 6 years ago. She was fired after 6 months, no reason listed. I cross-referenced that with the clinic's tax filings from that year. They had reported a loss due to internal embezzlement. They had never pressed charges, likely to avoid bad publicity. I dug deeper. I looked at her tax returns from the years she was married to Brandon. Joint filing. I saw the numbers. And then I saw the anomaly. 3 years ago, there was a withdrawal from Brandon's 401k retirement fund. $50,000. It was listed as a hardship withdrawal for medical expenses. I frowned. Brandon had excellent health insurance. We never had any major medical issues that year. I pulled up the withdrawal request form from the archives. There it was, a signature at the bottom. Brandon Caldwell. I pulled a magnifying glass from my drawer. I compared the signature on the screen to a birthday card Brandon had written me that same year. The loop on the B was wrong. The slant of the C was too sharp. It was a forgery. Monica had forged my son's signature to drain his retirement account while he was at work. She had stolen from her own husband my son 3 years before she buried him. I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. This was not just a moral failing. This was a federal crime. Wire fraud. Identity theft. But I wasn't done. I looked at the restraining order again. She claimed I was violent. She claimed she was a protective mother. I went back to the security footage from the previous night. I found the clip of Jax pushing Leo. I found the clip of Monica leaving the house in handcuffs, screaming about her car, not asking once about her son who was upstairs. I began to compile a new file. I named it Operation Eviction. I printed the forged withdrawal document. I printed the police report from the embezzlement case at the clinic. I downloaded the video of Jax abusing Leo. I downloaded the video of Monica being arrested for assaulting the officer. I laid the papers out on my desk. It was a mosaic of a sociopath. She thought a piece of paper from a family court judge could stop me. She did not understand that she had just invited the IRS into her life. A restraining order keeps a physical person away. It does not stop a tax audit. It does not stop a fraud investigation. It does not stop the gears of the federal government from grinding a criminal into dust. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the fraud tip line at the IRS. I didn't need to speak to an operator. I knew the direct line to the regional director. We used to have lunch on Tuesdays. "Hello, Agent Perkins," I said when he answered. "It is Doug. I have a case for you. It involves tax evasion, wire fraud, and the theft of pension funds, and I have the evidence packaged and ready to email." I paused, looking at the photo of Leo on my desk. "And Perkins," I added, "I need this fast. There is a child involved." I hung up the phone. I looked at the restraining order one last time. "You gave me 20 days to leave Monica," I said. "But you just gave yourself 5 to 10 years in federal prison." I packed the file into my briefcase. I put on my coat. I was not going to the house. I was not going to Leo's school. I was going to the one place where Monica could not hide. I was going to the courthouse to file a counter motion. But this time I wasn't filing as a grandfather asking for visitation. I was filing as a citizen reporting a felony in progress. The trembling was gone. The grief was packed away in a box. The only thing left was the calculation. The numbers never lie, Monica, and your balance just hit 0. The manila envelope in my hands felt heavier than it looked. Physically, it weighed only a few ounces, containing perhaps 30 pages of printed documents, photocopies, and digital forensic logs. But metaphorically, it weighed as much as a prison sentence. I stood in the line at the post office, surrounded by ordinary people mailing birthday cards and care packages. They saw an old man in a gray raincoat clutching a parcel. They did not know that I was holding a demolition order for a woman's life. In my 40 years as an auditor for the Internal Revenue Service, I learned that criminals always make the same mistake. They believe that if nobody is watching them in the moment, the act disappears. They steal a little bit here, forge a signature there, and when the sky does not immediately fall, they think they have gotten away with it. They do not understand that financial crimes leave ghosts. Every transaction creates a digital echo. Every signature leaves a trace of pressure on the paper. And unlike memories which fade, paperwork is immortal. Monica had made the fatal error of thinking she was smarter than the system. She thought that because Brandon was dead, his secrets died with him. She thought that because I was grieving, I was blind. But grief clears the mind in strange ways. It strips away the noise and leaves only the facts. And the facts contained in this envelope were damning. I stepped up to the counter. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, asked if I wanted to insure the package. I told her no. The contents were worthless to anyone else but priceless to the fraud division of the IRS. I paid the postage in cash. I watched her slap the label on the front. The address was not a home or a business. It was a secure processing center in Ogden, Utah, the place where tax evasions go to die. I walked out into the cool morning air, feeling a strange sense of calm. The first domino had been pushed. Let me explain exactly what was in that package. The night before, after I discovered the anomaly in Brandon's retirement account, I had spent 6 hours reconstructing the timeline of the theft. 3 years ago, Brandon's 401k had a balance of nearly $200,000. He had worked hard for that. It was his safety net. Then, on a Tuesday in November, a withdrawal request was submitted for $50,000. The reason listed was financial hardship due to medical expenses. I reviewed Brandon's medical records. He had a clean bill of health that year. I reviewed their joint bank accounts. There were no payments to hospitals. There were no payments to doctors. But there was 3 days after the deposit hit their account, a $50,000 transfer to a luxury car dealership for a down payment on a Mercedes. The same Mercedes I had just repossessed. Monica had liquidated a quarter of my son's future to buy a status symbol. But the crime wasn't just the waste of money. It was the signature. I had enlarged the digital scan of the withdrawal form. Brandon had a very specific way of signing his name. He was left-handed, and his ink strokes always trailed upward at the end. The signature on the form trailed downward. It was a good forgery, but to a forensic expert it was as obvious as a neon sign. She had signed his name, checked the box for hardship, and wired the funds. That is wire fraud. That is identity theft. And since it involved a federally regulated retirement account, she had just invited the FBI to the party. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was the second envelope I was holding. This one was addressed to the Claims Department of Pacific Life Insurance. This was the money Monica was counting on. The house was gone. The car was gone. The bank accounts were frozen. In her mind, the $1 million life insurance policy was her salvation. It was the reason she was fighting so hard to keep me away from Leo. She needed to present herself as the stable, grieving widow to collect the payout. She probably had the money spent in her head already. A condo in Miami. A new truck for Jax. Private school for Leo to keep up appearances. She had filed the claim yesterday. I received the alert because I was the original policyholder who set it up for Brandon when he was 25. She had checked the box that said sole primary beneficiary. She had attached a copy of the policy from 5 years ago, the one that listed her name. She did not know about the Tuesday before Brandon died. I sat on a park bench near the post office, closing my eyes, letting the memory wash over me. It was a painful memory, but necessary. Brandon had come to my house late at night. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken. The stress of the debt and Monica's demands were eating him alive. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he did his homework as a boy. "Dad," he had said, his voice trembling. "I think I made a mistake." I poured him a cup of coffee. I did not say I told you so. I just listened. "She does not love me, Dad. She loves what I can give her, and I can't give her anything else. I am empty." He told me about the arguments. He told me about Jax. He told me he suspected she was seeing someone else, but he was too afraid to confront her because she threatened to take Leo away. He was trapped. But in that moment of despair, my son found a spark of clarity. "I need to protect Leo," he said. "If something happens to me, I don't want her to have the money. She will blow it in a year, and Leo will have nothing." I went to my safe and pulled out the change of beneficiary form. I always kept legal documents on hand. It is a hazard of the profession. Brandon sat there, his hand shaking, and filled it out. He removed Monica Caldwell as the beneficiary. In the line for the new beneficiary, he wrote, "The Leo Caldwell Irrevocable Trust." And on the line for the trustee, the person who controls the money until Leo turns 25, he wrote my name. Douglas Edward Caldwell. We faxed it to the insurance company that night. We received the confirmation timestamped at 11:42 p.m. 3 days later, his heart gave out. Monica was operating on outdated intelligence. She was claiming $1 million based on a policy that no longer existed in that form. By filing that claim and signing the affidavit stating she was the rightful beneficiary, she was committing insurance fraud. Attempted grand larceny. I looked at the second envelope. Inside was the confirmation of the change, the time-stamped log, and a letter from me detailing the situation. When the insurance investigators received this, they would not just deny her claim. They would open a file. They would see a pattern. A woman who forged 401k documents. A woman who filed false police reports. A woman who was now trying to claim insurance money she had no right to. I stood up and walked back to the mailbox. I dropped the second envelope in. The metal clank of the lid closing sounded like a judge's gavel. The trap was fully set. Monica was sitting in a jail cell right now waiting for her hearing, thinking her biggest problem was a misdemeanor assault charge. She thought she could cry her way out of it. She thought she could play the victim card and get released. She had no idea that she was walking into a minefield. When she gets out, she will rush to check the insurance status. She will check the mail for a check that will never come. Instead, she will get a letter from the IRS auditing her for the last 5 years. She will get a letter from the insurance company's legal department threatening prosecution. And all the while she will be fighting me in family court for custody of Leo. She thinks the restraining order is her shield. She does not realize that I am not attacking her with my fists. I am attacking her with the one thing she worships and fears the most. Paperwork. I took out my phone. I checked the security cameras one more time. The house was still dark. Jax had not returned. Leo was alone. My heart tightened. The legal victory felt hollow when I thought about my grandson sitting in that cold darkness. The law moves slowly, but hunger and fear move fast. I could not wait for the mail to be delivered to save him. I had sent the letters to destroy Monica, but I needed to physically act to save Leo. I walked toward my car. The restraining order said I could not go within 500 feet of the house. It said I would be arrested if I tried to contact the boy. I started the engine. I looked at the GPS. I knew the exact distance to the house. I knew the exact layout of the property. And I knew something Monica didn't know. The property line of the house ended at the fence, but the woods behind the house, the dense forest that bordered the backyard, belonged to the city. I could get close. I could get close enough to see him. I could get close enough to let him know he wasn't alone. I drove carefully, obeying every traffic law. I could not afford to get pulled over. I was a man on a mission. The auditor had done his job at the post office. Now the grandfather had to do his job in the woods. As I drove, I thought about the phone call I had made to Agent Perkins at the IRS. I told him about the child. I told him that the fraud wasn't just about taxes, it was funding child neglect. Perkins has a daughter. I heard the shift in his tone. He promised to expedite the case. He promised to freeze her assets within 48 hours. Monica wanted a war. She wanted to scorch the earth. She didn't realize that I had been living in the fire for years. She thought she was the queen of the castle because she had the keys. She forgot that I was the one who built the castle, and I knew exactly where the weak stones were. The insurance money was gone. The retirement money was gone. The house was gone. The car was gone. All she had left was her freedom, and that was currently sitting in a manila envelope on a truck heading to Utah. I turned onto the road that led behind the subdivision. I parked the car a mile away, deep in a trail entrance. I put on my hiking boots. I grabbed my binoculars. I was going to watch over my grandson. And if Jax came back, if he touched a hair on that boy's head, the restraining order would be nothing more than a piece of paper found on my body after I did what needed to be done. I am coming, Leo. Grandpa is watching, and the storm is coming for them, not for us. Family court smells like floor wax and desperation. It is a place where love goes to die and where children become bargaining chips in games played by adults who should know better. I sat at the defendant's table next to Sarah Jenkins, my hands folded calmly on the polished wood. Across the aisle, Monica sat with her lawyer, Reynolds. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Gone were the designer dresses and the diamond earrings. Today she wore a simple, slightly ill-fitting gray cardigan and no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She looked frail. She looked exhausted. She looked like a martyr. Sitting in the gallery behind her, looking uncomfortable, in a suit that was too tight across the shoulders, was Jax. He was trying to look supportive, but his eyes kept darting toward the exit signs. He knew something was wrong. He just did not know what. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patterson with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked over the file. She sighed. She had probably seen 10 cases like this already this morning. Mrs. Caldwell, the judge said, looking down at Monica, "You are requesting a permanent restraining order against your father-in-law, and you are asking for full unsupervised custody of your son Leo. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Monica said, her voice trembling just the right amount. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "I am terrified for my son. Doug. Mr. Caldwell. He has become unstable since my husband died. He cut off our electricity. He cut off our water. We were living in the dark. My son was freezing." She paused for effect, looking at the judge with pleading eyes. "He blames me for Brandon's death," Monica continued, "and he is taking it out on Leo. He has a history of aggression. I just want to protect my child. I want to raise him in a safe environment." Reynolds stood up, adjusting his cheap tie. "Your Honor, my client is a grieving widow who has been subjected to a campaign of harassment by a wealthy, powerful man who is using his financial leverage to abuse her. We ask that the court grant the order and strip Mr. Caldwell of all visitation rights immediately." Judge Patterson turned her gaze to me. Her expression was cold. The story Monica told was compelling. It painted a picture of a cruel, vindictive old man torturing a helpless mother and child. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, "do you have anything to say before I rule?" Sarah stood up. She did not look at Monica. She looked straight at the bench. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice clear and authoritative, "we do not deny that Mr. Caldwell terminated the utility payments. However, he did so because he is the legal owner of the property and the utilities were in his name. He had no obligation to fund the lifestyle of the petitioner. But more importantly, the petitioner claims that Mr. Caldwell is a danger to the child. We argue that the true danger is sitting at the plaintiff's table." Reynolds jumped up. "Objection. Character assassination." "Overruled," the judge snapped. "Proceed, counsel." "Your Honor," Sarah continued, "we have evidence that contradicts the petitioner's claim of being a protective mother. In fact, we have evidence that clearly demonstrates gross negligence and child endangerment. We would like to submit Exhibit A, a video recording from the night of October 15th. Monica stiffened. She turned to look at Jax. Jax stopped chewing his gum. "What video?" Reynolds whispered to Monica. "I don't know," Monica whispered back, panic flickering in her eyes. Sarah walked to the evidence monitor and plugged in a USB drive. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. The courtroom grew silent. The video was grainy shot in night vision, but the image was unmistakable. It showed the living room of the Oak Street house. It showed the darkness. It showed the emptiness. And then the audio kicked in. The sound of Jax's voice filled the courtroom. Rough, slurred, aggressive. "Your mommy is an idiot!" The judge's eyebrows shot up. She leaned forward. On the screen, Jax was seen drinking from the scotch bottle. Little Leo walked into the frame clutching his teddy bear. He looked small. He looked terrified. "I'm hungry," Leo's voice said on the recording. It echoed in the silent courtroom. "Go to sleep, kid," Jax's voice boomed. I watched Monica. Her face went pale. She had not been there. She had been in a holding cell. She was seeing this for the first time, just like the judge. The video continued. The conversation about the pizza, the rejection, and then the moment that made the bailiff take a step forward. Jax stood up. Leo grabbed his leg, begging him not to leave. "Don't go, it's dark." And then the shove. It was not a gentle nudge. On the big screen, it looked violent. Jax pushed the 8-year-old boy away with enough force that Leo tumbled backward onto the rug. "Get off me!" Jax yelled on the tape. The courtroom gasped. Even the court stenographer stopped typing for a second. The video showed Jax storming out. The slam of the door was like a gunshot. Then the camera held on Leo, a small boy alone in a pitch-black mansion curling up on the floor and sobbing for his grandfather. Sarah paused the video. The image of Leo crying froze on the screen. "Your Honor," Sarah said quietly. "This footage was taken 2 nights ago. While Mrs. Caldwell was in police custody for assaulting an officer, she left her son in the care of her boyfriend, Mr. Jax Miller. This man who is currently sitting in your courtroom abandoned an 8-year-old child in a house without power, water, or phone service to go to a bar." Sarah turned to point at me. The only person who came for that boy was Douglas Caldwell. Despite the threats, despite the lies, my client went to the woods behind the property to keep watch over his grandson until the authorities could intervene. Judge Patterson slowly took off her glasses. She looked at the frozen image of the crying boy. Then she looked at Monica. The look was no longer one of sympathy. It was one of absolute disgust. "Mrs. Caldwell," the judge said, her voice dangerously low. "Is this the man you want to protect your son from?" Monica stood up, stammering. "Your Honor, I didn't know. I wasn't there. You entrusted your child to a man who abuses him and abandons him." The judge cut her off. "That is negligence, Mrs. Caldwell." The judge turned her eyes to the gallery. "Mr. Miller, please stand up." Jax stood up slowly. He looked like he wanted to vomit. The arrogance was gone. He was shrinking in his suit. "I didn't mean to," he started. "Silence," the judge barked. "Bailiff, please escort Mr. Miller to the hallway. I do not want him in my courtroom while I make this ruling, and I strongly suggest you do not leave the building, sir. I will be forwarding this tape to the district attorney's office for potential child abuse charges." Jax was led out, his head hanging low. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud. The judge turned back to Monica. "Mrs. Caldwell, your application for a restraining order is denied. Furthermore, based on the evidence of instability and neglect in your household, I am issuing an emergency temporary custody order." Monica grabbed Reynolds's arm. "No, you can't take him. I can, and I will," the judge said firmly. "Legal and physical custody of Leo Caldwell is awarded to his grandfather, Douglas Caldwell, effective immediately. Mrs. Caldwell, you are to surrender the child to Mr. Caldwell's care right now. You will have supervised visitation only pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services." Monica collapsed into her chair, sobbing. But this time, nobody handed her a tissue. This time, the tears were real, but they were useless. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I looked at the judge and nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. I walked past Monica's table. She looked up at me, her eyes red and hateful. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "No, Monica," I said softly, so only she could hear. "I just audited your life, and you came up short." I walked out of the courtroom doors. Sarah was right behind me. We walked down the hallway toward the waiting area, where a social worker was sitting with Leo. When Leo saw me, he didn't wait for permission. He jumped off the bench and ran. He hit me with the force of a cannonball, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Grandpa," he cried. I knelt down, ignoring the pain in my old knees. I wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his hair. He smelled like soap and childhood. He was safe. "Let's go home, Leo," I whispered. We walked out of the courthouse together, hand in hand. The sun was shining outside. The storm was far from over for Monica, but for us the clouds were breaking. I had won the battle for the boy. Now it was time to finish the war for the truth. The courtroom was still buzzing with the tension of the custody ruling when Sarah Jenkins stood up again. Monica was slumped in her chair, her face a mask of shock, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the social worker lead Leo out of the room. She had lost her child. But I knew Monica well enough to know that in the back of her mind, a calculation was already running. She was thinking about the money. She was thinking that even if she lost Leo, she would still have the $1 million life insurance payout to comfort her. She would use that money to hire better lawyers. She would use that money to fight me. She would use that money to keep Jax. But Sarah was not done. She cleared her throat, drawing the judge's attention back to the defense table. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Before we conclude these proceedings, there is one final matter regarding the financial stability of the petitioner, Mrs. Caldwell. Since the court has ordered a review of the assets to determine child support and legal fees, we have taken the liberty of subpoenaing a representative from Pacific Life Insurance." Monica's head snapped up. She looked at Reynolds, her cheap lawyer. "Why are they here?" she whispered loudly. "That is my money. They cannot touch it." Reynolds looked confused. He shrugged. "It is likely just a formality, Monica. Don't worry, the policy is in your name." I sat there watching them. The ignorance was almost painful to witness. They were walking into a buzzsaw, convinced it was a ceiling fan. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a sharp navy suit walked in carrying a leather briefcase. I recognized him. Mr. Henderson, the senior claims adjuster for the insurance company. I had sent him the package yesterday. He looked serious. He walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Sarah approached the witness. "Mr. Henderson, can you please state your role and your relationship to the policy of the late Brandon Caldwell?" "I am the senior claims adjudicator for Pacific Life." Henderson said, his voice dry and professional. "I oversee all high-value payouts, including the policy held by Mr. Caldwell." "Thank you," Sarah said. "Now, Mrs. Caldwell has asserted in her financial affidavit to this court that she is the sole beneficiary of a $1 million life insurance policy. Can you confirm if this is accurate?" Monica leaned forward, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. She needed him to say yes. She needed that lifeline. Henderson opened his file. He adjusted his glasses. "No," he said. "That is not accurate." The air left the room. Monica froze. "Excuse me," Reynolds stood up. "My client has a copy of the policy. It clearly lists her as the beneficiary." Henderson looked at Reynolds with the patience of a teacher explaining algebra to a toddler. "She has a copy of the policy from 5 years ago," Henderson explained. "However, insurance policies are living documents. The beneficiary designation can be changed at any time by the policyholder." Sarah smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Mr. Henderson, when was the last change made to the policy?" 3 days before the insured's death," Henderson replied. On Tuesday, October 10th, Mr. Brandon Caldwell submitted a notarized change of beneficiary form. He came to our office personally to ensure it was processed immediately. "And who is the new beneficiary?" Sarah asked. Henderson looked directly at Monica. "The sole beneficiary of the policy is the Leo Caldwell Irrevocable Trust." Monica let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. "What, no? That's a lie. He wouldn't do that." Henderson continued, ignoring her outburst. "The funds are to be held in trust for the minor child, Leo Caldwell, until he reaches the age of 25. The appointed trustee who has full control over the management of these funds is Mr. Douglas Caldwell." I looked at Monica. The devastation on her face was absolute. It was not just the loss of money. It was the realization that Brandon, the husband she thought she had controlled, the husband she thought was weak, had outsmarted her in his final days. He had seen her for who she was. He knew she would blow the money on clothes and cars and men like Jack's. He had used his last act of agency to protect his son from his wife. The judge looked at Monica. "Mrs. Caldwell, it appears your financial affidavit is fraudulent. You listed assets you do not possess. But Jack's was the real show." Jack's had been allowed back into the gallery after the custody ruling to wait for Monica. He was sitting in the back row, listening. When Henderson said, "the Leo Caldwell Irrevocable Trust," I saw Jax's eyes narrow. When Henderson said Douglas Caldwell is the trustee, I saw Jax's jaw clench. But when Sarah asked the final question, the coffin was nailed shut. "So just to be clear, Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, "how much money will Mrs. Monica Caldwell receive from this policy?" Henderson closed the file. $0.00. Zero. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. In the back of the room, there was a scraping sound. Everyone turned. Jax was standing up. He did not look at Monica with pity. He did not look at her with love. He looked at her with the cold, hard realization that his investment had just crashed to zero. "Where are you going?" Monica cried out, turning in her chair. "Jax, wait." Jax adjusted his jacket. He looked at her across the courtroom, his face twisted in a sneer. "I'm done, Monica," he said, his voice loud enough to be heard by the court reporter. "You said you were rich. You said you had millions coming. You're nothing but a broke widow with a criminal record." Jax, Monica screamed, reaching out as if she could grab him from 50 feet away. "We can fix this. Don't leave me. I'm not sticking around for the bankruptcy hearing," Jax spat. "Good luck with the old man." He turned and walked out. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. He walked out of her life just as easily as he had walked into it. He was a parasite, and the host was dead. Monica collapsed onto the table. Her wails filled the courtroom. It was a pathetic, ugly sound. She was crying for the money. She was crying for the man who just dumped her. She was crying for the house. But she still wasn't crying for the husband she buried, or the son she neglected, Reynolds. Her lawyer looked at the judge and began packing his briefcase. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I request a recess. I need to discuss payment options with my client." The judge banged her gavel. "Case dismissed. The court finds in favor of Mr. Douglas Caldwell on all counts. Mrs. Caldwell, you are advised to seek public counsel for your upcoming fraud charges. We are adjourned." I stood up. I felt lighter. The weight of the last 20 days was gone. I looked at Monica one last time. She was alone at the table, her head buried in her arms, sobbing into the wood. The room was emptying. The lights were humming. I walked over to her table. I didn't want to gloat, but I needed her to hear one thing. "Monica." She looked up. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup ruined. She looked at me with hatred, but beneath the hatred was fear. "Why," she whispered, "why did you do this? You could have just let us go." I leaned in close, my voice calm and steady. You gave me 20 days, Monica. You thought that was a deadline for me. But it wasn't. It was a grace period for you. You could have been kind. You could have been a mother. You could have mourned my son. Instead, you chose greed. I straightened up. Brandon knew Monica. That is the part that should haunt you. He knew you didn't love him, and he made sure you wouldn't profit from his death. I turned and walked away. Sarah was waiting for me at the door. We walked out into the hallway where Leo was waiting. When I saw him, the image of Monica fading in the rearview mirror of my mind disappeared. Leo looked up at me, holding his bear. "Is it over, Grandpa?" he asked. I took his small hand in mine. It was warm. It was real. "Yes, Leo," I said. "It is finally over." We walked out of the courthouse into the bright, blinding sunlight. Behind us, in the shadows of the legal system, Monica was left with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. But I had everything. I had my grandson. I had my honor. And I had the truth. And as any auditor will tell you, the truth is the only asset that never depreciates. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung open, and for the first time in 20 days, the air tasted clean. It was over. The judge had spoken, the gavel had fallen, and the boy holding my hand was finally safe. Leo was gripping my fingers so tightly, his knuckles were white, as if he were afraid the ground might open up and swallow him whole if he let go. I squeezed back a silent promise that I was never going to let that happen. We walked down the wide limestone steps, the sound of the city traffic humming in the distance, a stark contrast to the stifling silence of the courtroom. Behind us, I heard the click of high heels on the pavement. It was a frantic, uneven rhythm. Monica was emerging into the sunlight. She had lost her house, her lover, and her son in the span of an hour. Most people would have retreated into the shadows to lick their wounds. But Monica was not most people. She was a creature of ego, and she could not accept that the script she had written for herself had been burned to ash. I did not turn around. I kept walking toward my sedan parked at the curb. Sarah walked beside me, her briefcase swinging in time with her stride. She looked at me and gave a small, grim nod. She knew what was coming. She had seen the black SUVs parked in the loading zone before we even entered the building. Monica's voice rang out shrill and desperate. She was running down the steps now, ignoring her lawyer who was trying to hold her back. "You cannot just walk away. We need to talk. You owe me." She reached the bottom of the steps, breathless, her face flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. She was about to lung toward us to make one last scene to try and claw back some semblance of control. But she never got the chance. Two men in dark suits stepped out from behind the black SUVs. They moved with the synchronized precision of predators who had trapped their prey. They did not shout. They simply blocked her path. I recognized the man on the left. It was Agent Perkins from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He didn't look like a police officer. He looked like an accountant who carried a gun. "Monica Caldwell." Perkins asked, his voice flat and uninterested in her drama. Monica stopped short, nearly colliding with his chest. She blinked, confused. "Who are you?" "Get out of my way. I am talking to my father-in-law." Perkins pulled a badge from his jacket pocket. The sun caught the gold shield, flashing it into her eyes. "I am Special Agent Perkins with the Internal Revenue Service, and this is Detective Miller from the Economic Crimes Unit. You are under arrest." "Arrest," Monica laughed. It was a hysterical, brittle sound. "For what? I didn't do anything." "This is harassment. Doug put you up to this." Perkins did not debate her. He simply pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted menacingly. "Mrs. Caldwell, you are being charged with 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft regarding the unauthorized withdrawal of 401k funds, and 1 count of insurance fraud." Monica's face went from red to a ghostly white. The fight drained out of her body as if someone had pulled a plug. The 401k, she whispered. But that was years ago. Brandon never said anything. Brandon is not the one pressing charges, Monica Perkins said, spinning her around. The federal government is. I heard the snap of the handcuffs. It was a final, definitive sound. The sound of a steel trap closing. I reached the car. I opened the back door for Leo. He was looking back, his eyes wide, watching his mother being pushed against the side of the black SUV. Grandpa, Leo asked, his voice small. Why are the policemen holding Mommy? I knelt down, blocking his view with my body. I smoothed his hair back. They are just talking to her, Leo. It is grown-up business. You do not need to worry about it. You just worry about what we are going to have for dinner. Pizza, Leo nodded slowly, trusting me. He climbed into the car and buckled his seatbelt. I closed the door firmly. The heavy thud of the car door was like a barrier between us and the chaos. Inside that car, there was silence. Inside that car, there was peace. But outside, the storm was raging. Doug, Monica screamed. I froze. My hand was on the handle of the driver's side door. Doug, tell them it was a mistake. Help me. I turned my head slowly. I looked at her one last time. She was pressed against the hood of the federal vehicle. Her hair was in her face. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. She looked terrified. She looked pathetic. She was looking at me with pleading eyes, the same eyes she had used to manipulate my son for a decade. She thought she could still reach me. She thought there was still a shred of the kindly old grandfather she could exploit. Please, she sobbed. I am Leo's mother. You can't let them take me. I looked at her, I looked at the handcuffs, and then I looked at Agent Perkins. I gave Perkins a small nod. A thank you. Then I opened my car door and got in, Doug's to Doug. Her screams were muffled as I closed my door and rolled up the windows. I started the engine. I adjusted the rearview mirror. I could see her clearly. She was thrashing now, screaming my name, screaming at the sky, screaming at a world that had finally stopped giving her what she wanted. I put the car in drive. I did not look back at the courthouse. I did not look back at the woman who had destroyed my son. I looked at Leo in the back seat. He was holding his bear, looking out the side window at the trees passing by. Grandpa, he said. Yes, Leo. Can we get pepperoni? I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in months. We can get whatever you want, kiddo. I pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic. The image of Monica Caldwell in handcuffs faded into the distance, shrinking smaller and smaller, until she was just a speck in the rearview mirror. And then she was gone. The audit was complete. The books were balanced. And for the first time in a long time, the ledger of my life showed a positive return. The ocean air smells different than the rain in Seattle. It smells of salt and new beginnings. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that courthouse holding my grandson's hand, leaving behind the wreckage of a life that was built on lies. We drove south that day, putting miles between us and the memories of the mansion on Oak Street. We drove until the gray sky turned blue, and the noise of the city faded into the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore. I bought a small house. It is nothing like the estate Monica coveted. It is a simple cottage with peeling blue paint and a porch that overlooks the water. It has 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smells of coffee and toast, and a living room that is actually lived in. There are no marble floors here. There are no crystal chandeliers. But there is laughter. There is the sound of cartoons playing on the television on Saturday mornings. There is the sound of a boy running down the hallway without fear of being scolded for making noise. The mansion on Oak Street is gone. Not physically, of course. It still stands on that hill, cold and imposing. But it belongs to a young couple now, a pair of architects who bought it at the foreclosure auction. I sold it 3 weeks after the trial. The proceeds covered the principal of the loan, the legal fees, and the penalty interest. The rest, exactly as I promised, went directly into the trust for Leo. It was the final entry in the audit of my son's estate. The debt was paid. The asset was liquidated. The account was closed. I do not think about Monica often. I know where she is. Sarah keeps me updated, sending me the occasional brief email. She is currently serving her sentence in a minimum security federal facility in Oregon. I hear she works in the laundry duty rotation. I hear she has filed 2 appeals, both of which were denied before they even reached a judge. She writes letters sometimes. They arrive in plain white envelopes with the prison stamp on the corner. I do not burn them. That would be too dramatic. I simply place them unopened in a box in the garage. They are just paperwork now, irrelevant documents from a closed case file. But I do not spend my days looking back at the past. I spend them looking at the horizon. Right now, the sun is beginning to dip below the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I am sitting on the steps of our back porch, a mug of tea in my hands. Down on the small wooden dock that stretches into the bay, Leo is standing. He looks different than the boy I rescued from the dark. He has grown 2 inches. His cheeks are full again, the hollow look of neglect replaced by the healthy glow of days spent running on the beach. He is holding a fishing rod that is slightly too big for him, his face scrunching up in concentration as he watches the bobber floating on the surface. "Hold it steady!" "Leo," I call out to him. Patience is the trick. He looks back at me and grins. His 2 front teeth are missing now, lost to the natural process of growing up, not to an accident or a fall. "Like this, Grandpa?" he asks, adjusting his grip. "Exactly like that," I say. I watch him turn back to the water. I am teaching him to fish, but really I am teaching him something else. I am teaching him that good things do not come from taking. They do not come from demanding or manipulating. They come from waiting. They come from skill. They come from the quiet confidence of knowing that you can provide for yourself. People ask me sometimes, usually the neighbors who do not know the full story, if I feel lonely. They see an old man raising a young boy, and they offer pity. They do not understand. I am not lonely. For the first time in 10 years, I am free. I am no longer the bank. I am no longer the safety net for ungrateful adults. I am just a grandfather. The bobber dips below the water. Leo yelps in excitement. "I got one, Grandpa. I got one. Reel it in, kiddo. Keep the line tight." I put down my tea and walk down to the dock. I watch him struggle with the reel, his small muscles working hard. I do not grab the rod for him. I let him do it. He needs to know the weight of his own success. He pulls a shimmering silver fish onto the wood, laughing with pure, unadulterated joy. We spend the next hour cleaning the fish and preparing the grill. As we eat dinner on the porch, watching the stars come out, Leo falls asleep with his head on my lap. I stroke his hair, listening to his steady breathing. This is the only return on investment I ever wanted. This peace, this safety. I look out at the dark ocean. I think about the day at the funeral. I think about the rain and the mud. I think about the woman who leaned into my ear and told me to get out of her house. She thought she was breaking me. She thought she was sending me to my end. She did not realize she was sending me to my beginning. My daughter-in-law was right about one thing. She said I was old. She said I should stop crying. And looking at my grandson safe and happy, I realized she was correct. Tears are a currency, and they should only be spent on those who deserve them. As for my enemies, I do not have tears. I only have numbers. My journey taught me that silence is often louder than screaming. Many people mistake the quiet patience of the elderly for weakness, but as Monica discovered, that patience is simply the time we take to aim before we strike. We often think family means unconditional acceptance, but true family is built on mutual respect. You cannot build a home on a foundation of ungratefulness and expect it to stand. Never underestimate the quiet ones, for we are the ones who know where the bodies are buried, or in my case, where the money is hidden. Protect those who cannot protect themselves, and never apologize for demanding the respect you have earned. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and consequence. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to cut off a toxic family member to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. See you in the next story.